we look at grocery store shelves and see a static reality. A box of pasta costs $1.50 today, so we assume it will cost $1.50 next week. If it goes up by a dime, we blame inflation, grumble at the checkout and move on. But that shelf is an illusion. What you are looking at isn't the current state of the global food supply. It is a financial, delayed reaction. Right now, behind the plastic packaging and fluorescent lights, a massive structural trap is springing across the agricultural sector. Some of the most foundational, dirt-cheap items in your pantry are sitting on supply chain fractures that have already occurred. But the bill hasn't been delivered to the consumer yet. We aren't talking about the high-profile spikes that dominated the evening news over the last couple of years, the beef shortages, or the sudden spikes in fresh fruit prices. We are talking about the invisible underbelly of the grocery store, the dry goods, the shelf-stable staples, and the processing ingredients that form the literal bedrock of the modern diet. There are 30, 40, even 60% price increases already locked into the global logistics grid. The contracts have been, crop yields have been measured, and the warehouse inventories are dwindling. The retail price tags just haven't caught up to the math yet. For the past 24 months, I've been tracking this lag effect. I've been digging through wholesale commodity data, tracking shipping manifests, and talking to logistics insiders who manage the flow of goods from the Central Valley of California to the shipping ports of Southeast Asia. What they are seeing is an unprecedented convergence of geographic traps and human errors that are about to eliminate cheap food as we know it. The grocery industry operates on thin margins and long-term futures contracts. When a massive drought hits a major exporter or a foreign government quietly rewrites its export laws to protect its own population, your local supermarket doesn't change its prices the next morning. They can't. They are bound by supply agreements that shield the consumer for 6, 12, or sometimes 18 months. But those shields are expiring right now. When they do, the repricing will happen overnight, and it will catch millions of households completely off guard. To understand the scale of what is coming, you have to look at the sheer fragility of our system. We built a global food apparatus optimized entirely for cost efficiency, stripping away every ounce of redundancy. We assumed the weather would remain predictable, that diesel would stay cheap, and that trade corridors would remain open indefinitely. That gamble failed. Today, we are going to look at 15 specific everyday foods that are locked into this upward trajectory. We will break down exactly why their current store prices are a statistical lie and how much more you will be paying for them in the coming months. But pay close attention when we reach number 4 on this list. It involves a fundamental kitchen ingredient that is currently undergoing a massive structural diversion, a shift so hidden from public discourse, and yet so mathematically absolute, that the very day I finished analyzing the raw trade data, I packed up my car, drove to the nearest restaurant supply warehouse, and bought enough of it to last my family for the next 5 years. Most people are completely blind to this specific mechanism, but once you see the connection between global energy markets and this single white crystal, you realize that the price on the shelf today is the lowest you will ever see it for the rest of your life. This isn't about hoarding or panic, it's about understanding food as a currency that is rapidly devaluing. The global agricultural system is no longer a self-correcting machine. When a factory runs out of microchips, you can build another facility or alter the circuit board layout. When you lose 40% of a biological infrastructure, or when a major river delta dries up across 3 consecutive seasons, there is no fast-forward button. You cannot force a tree to grow faster, and you cannot negotiate with biology. The rules of the game have shifted, and the cheap calories that anchored the American household budget for 3 generations are disappearing into a black hole of structural deficits. To trace the origin of this pricing crisis, you have to look past the standard corporate excuses of rising labor costs and localized weather disruptions. The real trap was laid decades ago through a series of interlocking legislative mandates, geopolitical concessions, and rigid geographical realities. This is a story of engineered vulnerability, where the pursuit of extreme optimization turned the global agricultural network into a brittle glass structure. The primary catalyst sits within the concept of specialized agricultural zones. For generations, trade policies encouraged nations to abandon domestic food self-sufficiency in favor of importing from hyper-efficient, single-crop super-regions. Canada's prairie provinces became the world's default supplier of durum wheat, the precise high-protein crop required for industrial pasta manufacturing. Saskatchewan and Alberta alone account for the vast majority of global export availability. When back-to-back production cycles are hit by systemic disruptions, the global pasta pipeline does not merely tighten, it chokes. In late 2024 and throughout 2025, regional supply reports confirmed that while total wheat volume fluctuated, the specific yields of high-grade amber durum plummeted due to persistent subsoil moisture deficits. Because global millers in Italy and the United States operate on fixed technical specifications, they cannot simply substitute low-protein bread wheat into pasta extruders without destroying product integrity. The result is a silent bidding war on the wholesale market. Italian processors facing strict domestic quality mandates have been forced to outbid American buyers for the remaining Canadian yields, driving the cost of raw inputs up long before the retail boxes are stamped with a price code. Simultaneously, a separate structural trap has triggered across the South American sugar trade, directly forcing the crisis mentioned at number 4 on our list. Brazil controls the global sugar market, but its vast agricultural apparatus operates on an economic paradox known as the flex fuel allocation ratio. Industrial sugarcane processing mills in São Paulo and the Center-South region are dual-purpose factories. They can instantly pivot their daily crushing operations between refining raw sugar for export or distilling anhydrous ethanol for the domestic fuel grid. The decision is driven entirely by real-time margin calculations. In August 2025, the Brazilian government instituted a sweeping policy shift, legally raising the mandatory ethanol blending ratio in commercial gasoline from 27% to 30%. This regulatory mandate instantly created a massive, artificial domestic demand for biofuel, requiring an estimated 1.4 billion litres of additional ethanol. By early 2026, international trade circulars confirmed the inevitable consequence. Brazilian mills adjusted their production mix to favour ethanol over food, creating a direct supply deficit in raw sugar exports. This domestic energy mandate has effectively pulled millions of tons of sugar out of the global grocery pool to fuel commuter vehicles in South America. The United States market, heavily insulated by rigid tariff rate quotas and strict import barriers designed to protect domestic sugar beet corporate interests, is uniquely ill-equipped to handle this external squeeze. The quota system artificially restricts the entry of cheaper, foreign sugar during normal periods, meaning that when the global pool shrinks, American food manufacturers are forced to absorb compounding domestic premiums. Yukasugar.com, Yishwan. This brings us to the domestic infrastructure collapse altering the pricing of staple proteins, specifically canned tuna and commercial peanut butter. The fishing fleets harvesting skipjack and albacore tuna across the Western and Central Pacific are bound by the economic realities of maritime logistics. Running an industrial purse seine fishing vessel requires thousands of gallons of marine diesel per day. When global maritime fuel costs remained structurally elevated through 2024 and 2025, the baseline operational cost per ton of harvested fish reset at a higher level. Furthermore, the regulatory bodies managing international fishing grounds implemented stricter seasonal closures to prevent stock collapse, shrinking the permissible fishing windows. For commercial peanut processing, the trap is purely geographical. Nearly half of the United States peanut crop is anchored in the soil of Georgia. The agricultural processing sector operates on long-term fixed contracts with farmers, but when multi-season heat anomalies hit the southeast, reducing the grade of the runner peanut crop used for industrial grinding, manufacturers cannot easily source substitutes. The supply agreements that shielded grocery buyers throughout 2025 are hit by a compounding wave of secondary input increases, the price of food-grade plastic polymers for jars, the cost of automated aluminum canning lines, and the inescapable reality of refrigerated freight logistics. Every step of the movement from farm to distribution center has repriced, creating an accumulated debt that is currently coming due at the retail shelf. The conflict has moved from the fields directly into the corporate boardrooms and regional distribution networks, creating an immediate, unresolved clash between raw resource scarcity and retail consumer limits. We are witnessing a systemic breakdown where individual components of the agricultural supply chain are actively working against each other. A primary point of friction is the domestic oil and biofuel industry, which is locked in an intense battle with food processors over a single core resource, soybean oil. Under the Federal Renewable Fuel Standard and an array of state-level carbon reduction initiatives, major energy corporations receive massive regulatory credits for producing renewable diesel. This is not traditional biodiesel. It is a chemically identical drop-in replacement for petroleum diesel made directly from agricultural lipids. Because energy companies operate on far wider profit margins than food manufacturers, they have been aggressively outbidding commercial baking and cooking oil companies for raw domestic soybean supplies. By early 2026, industry reports indicated that nearly half of all domestic soybean oil production was being consumed by fuel refineries rather than food production facilities. This industrial diversion has forced salad dressing manufacturers, snack food corporations, and commercial bakeries into an aggressive competition for alternative oils, such as canola and palm, driving up the baseline cost of every packaged product that relies on fats for shelf stability or texture. This industrial conflict is compounded by an ongoing biological crisis in the domestic egg sector. The highly pathogenic avian influenza virus, which completely reshaped egg pricing in previous cycles, has fundamentally broken the traditional recovery model for commercial poultry operations. Historically, a major disease outbreak meant a sharp price spike, followed by a rapid return to baseline as flocks were culled and repopulated within 6 months. However, the current epidemiology of the virus has changed. It has become endemic in wild migratory bird populations, meaning that commercial facility reinfections are occurring year-round rather than seasonally. When an outbreak occurs at an industrial egg facility, federal biosecurity mandates require the immediate culling of the entire flock. The financial math of restocking these facilities has turned into a catastrophic trap for independent producers. A young laying hen takes roughly 20 weeks of feed, climate-controlled housing, and veterinary care before she produces her first commercial egg. With feed costs remaining structurally elevated due to global fertilizer pricing and shipping lane disruptions, the capital required to rebuild a flock of 1 million birds has doubled over the last 3 years. Many mid-tier producers are simply walking away from the industry or selling out to massive corporate conglomerates, consolidating the market and leaving retail pricing entirely at the mercy of a few major distributors who are maximizing their margins to cover ongoing biosecurity risks. The exact same pattern of hidden cost compounding is visible in the canned tomato sector, where the entire structure relies on a shrinking geographic footprint in California's Central Valley. Processing tomatoes are not the fresh varieties found in the produce aisle. They are thick-skinned, low-moisture fruits, bred specifically for high-speed automated harvesting and industrial canning. This sector is caught in a direct clash with local water allocation policies and escalating land values. Under revised Regional Groundwater Management Acts, agricultural water pumping has been strictly capped to prevent aquifer collapse. Farmers must now purchase expensive surface water allocations or leave a portion of their acreage completely fallow. To maintain profitability, growers are systematically shifting their remaining irrigated land away from lower-margin processing crops like tomatoes and into high-value permanent crops like almonds or wine grapes. A major logistics manager based out of Sacramento recently confirmed that contracted processing tomato acreage fell to near historic lows in consecutive seasons. The remaining processing plants are operating below peak capacity, which drives up the fixed operational cost per individual can produce. These facilities cannot absorb these structural losses. They are passing them directly down the pipeline to grocery chains through revised wholesale price lists that are just now beginning to take effect at the retail level. Compounding this domestic stress is an unprecedented international policy shift, guarding global rice exports. India, which typically commands 40% of the global rice trade, has continuously adjusted its export restrictions to manage internal food security and domestic price inflation. While the total ban on certain varieties was partially modified, the implementation of minimum export prices and volatile export duties has forced international buyers to scramble for supply from alternative exporters like Thailand and Vietnam. These secondary markets do not have the surplus capacity to absorb global demand, causing benchmark international rice prices to hit sustained highs. This has triggered a massive capital flight into bulk commodities, where institutional food buyers are hoarding physical inventories to hedge against future export bans. The retail consumer shopping at a neighborhood supermarket is not seeing a sudden empty shelf. They are seeing a slow, deliberate shrinking of packaging